Hello, my name's Tom Cahill. It's the 17th of October 2013. I want to make a quick video today about something which I've got a bit of an insight into that people may or may not find interesting, but I don't really have a conclusion to it, and that's why I'm making the video, because I'm just stating what I know and what I don't know about it. Now, about 2 years ago, I think it was in 2011, I'd read a book by somebody called Hallett, and I'd listened to radio interviews he'd done. He'd done one on Red Ice, he'd done one with Jim Fetzer, a couple with Red Ice, one with Red Ice, a couple with Jim Fetzer, and he'd also done one with, or a few with the Zeb report. That's right, Zep report, I believe, in America. Now, this guy wrote this book called Hitler Was a British Agent. He also wrote another book called The Family Court. No, Are You My Father? The subtitle being The Family Court and Other Experiments. And he wrote another book called New Zealand: A Blackmailer's Guide. Now, the thing with this guy is, I didn't really know what to make of the guy, but I found lots of things he said very interesting. Now, the two main things were the world's run on shame, because I always thought that was the case anyway. And so therefore, people fit people up. If you haven't got the dirt on them, you can't control them. You've got no use for them. You occasionally need to have some people in high up positions who are like clean as clean, and you just basically marginalise them, and they're just there for window dressing. And most of the politicians are homosexuals at the very minimum, or they're like really pervy. You know what I mean? They've got lots of really much worse problems with them. They've all got cover marriages, and of course that fits up because you've got all the British politicians. If you look at them. I mean, I was born in 1981. When I was growing up, some of the Tory politicians, if you just looked at them, they just looked like they were kind of like rotting to death as they were standing in front of you. I mean, Norman Lamont with his, he wasn't rotting to pieces, but he just looked like a complete freak. You've got what was that one? I don't know, loads of them. They all just look completely fucked up. And then you've got the new breed. And England seem to do this better than most other countries. Also, a lot of New Zealand MPs are incredibly ugly. Americans, the MPs don't, or their equivalent, don't seem to look as bad. They look like normal, which is a bit weird. But in England, they all seem to look extremely fucked up. It seems to be something that they're going for. And then you've got the newer breed, like the new Labour lot. They didn't all look extremely ugly, but they all looked extremely untrustworthy, and they all looked like perverts, didn't they? None of them really looked like normal people. That you wouldn't trust them as far as you could throw them, basically, and you wouldn't put anything past them. But people always laugh and agree with you when you say it. But they go, and you're like, so well, why did you vote for them then? They go, it's just the way they are. It's like, well, all right then. Well, then you voted for it. That's what you get. Point is this. Hallett. I read his book, and I was listening to the thing about the world being run on shame, and I thought that was interesting. I didn't really know what to make about the exact details he was claiming to be the case, and this and that and the other. The point is that his other thing, which I found even more interesting, was he was talking about the deconstruction and construction of the subconscious. Now, I happen to believe that that's a factual thing. I don't know what his involvement with it was. I don't know if what he claims to be the case is true, but definitely there's something to be said for this, that your subconscious is responsible for everything. It leads your conscious mind, and if you can somehow get into someone's subconscious, you can sort of basically make them never go anywhere. And if you can kind of help the subconscious improve its ability, which is not through trying to make it work from your foreconscious, because that's not how it works. It works the other way around. It's much more complicated because we're not trained to do it. You can basically achieve anything, and I do fully believe that. And I do believe that your subconscious is like a magnet, and it pulls things in front of you that will be useful for you. And I do believe it works like a Google search engine, and I do actually believe that's the case. So that's what I found incredibly interesting. And I wanted to talk to him about this. So I got in touch with the guy. And the only reason I got in touch with him is because when I got the Hitler Was a British Agent book, it actually had his email on it. He said something like, enjoy the book. And I thought, this isn't from a book company. This comes straight from him. So I got back in touch with him. I spoke to him on Skype once. And he said, I'm coming to England. And I said, oh, right, well, when are you coming? And he said, I'm coming in about 2 weeks. And he said, we should meet up for a chat and stuff. I said, okay, no problem, because I said, I like your books, I'm very interested. And I was very, very pleased, because exactly like this, if you've got your subconscious seemed to be drawing things in, because I did really, really want to speak to him. I wanted to speak to him a lot. And I don't think I've ever wanted to speak to anyone more than this, because I really did. So without him getting a big head, he has got a big head, I really did. So, and then when it got close to the time, I said, so what's happening? Are you going to meet up? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, where are you staying? And at the time I had a spare room. I was staying in London. And I said, well, you might as well just go and stay in the spare room for a bit, because again, I wanted to speak to him. And what better, you let him stay for a bit, you're going to get to speak to him, aren't you? Well, you'd hope so. So all in all, I was very, very pleased. And I picked his brain for a while, spoke about lots of different interesting things, and he stayed for quite a while. In the end, he stayed for really quite a long time, which suited me down to the ground, didn't put me out really. So that was lucky. The thing is, like, some of the things Greg comes out with, like, are definitely true, and some of the things he's been told are definitely based on like genuine knowledge and genuine intelligence. People definitely do tell him stuff. So anyone who says no, he's just making it all up, he's just dreaming it all up, that's not the case. But some of it I don't believe. Right? But then, I'm not knocking into that, I'm just saying. Now the problem is that most of the things that he says, the core principles, and the things that got him into writing books, like for instance the first one about the family courts, and the way the communistic sort of lesbo agenda, sort of like trying to like get men out of the family and fuck all the children over by like removing the male from the home so that then paedophiles can move in, and all that stuff is 100% correct. I never actually finished that Are You My Father book, The Family Court and Other Experiments, but he does have first-hand experience of it. His daughter did get taken off him, and then as soon as she turned 16, she moved straight back in with him, so she'd been separated from him, and it was being used as a tool against him. The state were using his daughter as a weapon against him, so he has been very hard done to. He does know a lot about this, and he is articulate enough to explain it in a way and he does cut through a lot of the bullshit. He does see beyond what's put in front of him. But and all this stuff about all the perverts in the royal family and that. I mean, all of it. I don't even think the wildest imagination in the world you could make it up. They're such colossal fuck ups. I mean, they're not English. They are Nazis. They are Jewish. You know what I mean? The Jewish Nazis. It's too fucked up. You couldn't believe it. But it's actually true, and it is true. And I do believe that quite a lot of the children are illegitimate, obviously. And this happens every generation, because you've got Prince Harry. Quite clearly, he's not got the same genetics as William, because William's already fallen to pieces. He looked good looking for a little while. Now his hair's in a big frizzy mess. You can get that stuff regained now. You can get various chemicals you can take. You don't even have to go bald. You don't have to get a hair implant like that idiot Rooney. You don't even have to do that nowadays. So how sick must William be to be falling to pieces already? He's already fallen to pieces, and he's only 30. I mean, that's obviously something very suspect going on there. Lots of inbreeding probably is the reason. Harry doesn't look all fucked up. He's only 2 years younger. Doesn't make any sense. Right. Anyway, the thing that in the end me and Greg fell out, right, because he did something which he shouldn't have done, and he kind of compromised me and made me look like a dickhead, because I introduced him to somebody. And I don't really know how this happened. I don't think this was an accident, how the two things, like he came to be coming back to London a year and a bit later, and I happened to be get in touch with this particular guy through somebody who both me and Greg knew. Maybe it was a coincidence, but it wasn't that much coincidence, because it was through somebody we both knew. The point is, it was a guy who'd written a book, and or he'd written a transcript of a book. Then Greg had got hold of this transcript through someone else, and then he'd sort of written it up, edited it, but he couldn't find the guy. This is his story anyway, and I don't think he could find the guy, because I know I spoke to the guy's agent, and also he had a lawyer cousin, and the lawyer cousin said, no, I got emails from Greg Hallett, I thought he was a nutcase, so I thought I wouldn't put him through to him. And the guy whose book it was actually said, oh, well, I would have wanted him to speak to him. So there's a question there's like, was this guy shielding him because he's an intelligence asset and he's controlling his relative by not putting people through to him, or is he genuinely well-meaning, just think Hallett's a complete idiot and can't be dealing with him? It's a question, it's an interesting question. I don't know what the answer is, because I don't know whether the subject matter of the book, which is meant to be a non-fiction book, whether it's believable or whether it's just a load of nonsense. I honestly couldn't say, and I don't know. Now, one thing I will say, that particular book, and people who know who Greg Hallett is will know about this book, because I just don't want to give the guy's name at the minute. Basically, if he's telling porcupines, they're establishment porcupines, this guy, his credentials add up. I've been in his house 2 or 3 times, so with the greatest respect to him, I don't know if he's telling the truth or not. I haven't even read the entire book, but he says it's all like, kosher. So who cares? I mean, he's old. He'll probably be dead soon. He wrote a good book. It's quite interesting, quite a bit. Maybe it's a bit of a laugh. And I think, he was commissioned by Lord Mountbatten to write a report, he tells people, and apparently you can look at it in Southampton Library again. I would like to go down there and just check to see, but I'm sure it is there. So, and Mountbatten didn't want to write a boring book about the war. He wanted it to be kind of like interesting. He didn't want it like a military report. Now, this guy, when they had the COP, that COPP memorial, COP Heroes Memorial. Now, he didn't like the idea of calling it Heroes, but anyway, somebody else called it this. And these people called COP, and they basically went forward before the Allied advance during World War II, went on the beaches. At least 50% of them got killed. And they creep on the beaches with the Germans going around with the dogs and put tracker beacons on so that then the Allies could land on the beach without having to, it was kind of before its time kind of stuff. And they had a reunion last September. I think it was the 27th of September last year. Yeah, that's when it was. And it was on some island somewhere. But you can look it up. There's a website called copheroes.org or something. You can look it up. That's COPP. Now, this guy was called John Ainsworth Davis. That's with a hyphenated, so it's John Ainsworth Davis. That's hyphenated. Right, now this guy, he used to write under a pen name called Christopher Crichton. He used to be a good friend of Ian Fleming, and he also knows Roger Moore very well. And basically, the point is, this guy looks like, very likely, that he was the inspiration for James Bond. So he was working in the film industry afterwards. He also used to produce The Saint when Roger Moore was in it. I think Roger Moore's losing his marbles now. He's getting a bit old. I think he's, getting a bit senile. That's what he says, but he's living in Switzerland, and he definitely gave me the impression, like from where he lives, I've been around his house two or three times, or three times when I've been in. I went around calling for him and I couldn't get in one day. So, but the point is, I've been around there. It's in Hampstead, in that posh part near Bishop's Avenue. So it's in the very rich part. It seems totally credible to me. Everything he says, like he reckons he did dancing lessons with the Queen when he was younger, before she was the Queen, when she was a princess. He used to go to holiday in Winston Churchill's in Chartwell, where Winston Churchill used to live. He's an establishment figure. But anyway, the point is that I fell out with Greg because Greg, when he had sort of located this guy, we said he couldn't locate. He said to me, well, I said, well, I happen to have met this guy. And he said, oh, could you introduce us? And I said, yeah, so long as you don't go round there fucking being a big big bananas twat like what you often are, and sort of bullying him, because I know what you're like. You're like manipulating people and you don't care. You're a narcissist. You bully people. He doesn't bully me, but he bullies virtually everybody else. It's quite funny. It is actually very funny, but it's also extremely obnoxious. And I thought, I'm not having him going round to some elderly person's house and just basically doing their heads in, I don't want them dying or, being really upset because of his obnoxious behaviour. So he goes, yeah, no problem. And he goes round there, and he was being a bit of a twat, but he was being less of a twat than what he usually is when he's got an audience. He was doing the thing he was doing. I don't know why he was doing this. He got given a glass of brandy or something, and he was holding it up like this, up like that. Now, he was doing that for attention-seeking reasons. It was very strange. I don't know what the fuck he thought. And he was getting sideward looks at him. But the thing is, this guy, despite the fact he'd been very angry when he found out that Greg had written the whole book and was going to publish it, calling himself the author, he was very angry. He wanted to call the police. Before I got Greg round this time, he calmed down and he thought, fucking hell, he's actually put an index in. He's done a very good job of it. But what Greg had done, this is what you just got to say, what the fuck's he doing? He'd written on it, author, Lord Chancellor. And you're like, fucking hell, right? And then it would I don't know why, well, I do know why he'd done this, but I don't know why he did it at the same time, because basically he's been staying in Portugal quite a bit, and there's this guy, it's very, very funny, there's this guy who plays in a musical instrument, this guy called Francisco Manuel, he reckons that his great granddad was the only legitimate son of Queen Victoria, and this blind King George, who of some country or another, got her pregnant. They actually had got married, but then they had this kid, and then she decided to get married again, and then she got married to like gay Albert, and then all the other kids were like not even Alberts anyway. But because the other marriage hadn't been annulled, they didn't get divorced. It wasn't legitimate, and they're all not legitimate. And then this guy'd been hidden in Portugal. The problem with this is, Greg says this is all proved by photos. And he's got these photos, and it's quite interesting because in royal photos you will notice the Queen is always bang, like posed photos, right in the middle. And it is true that when you've got these bigwigs, you can tell certain things. There is obviously an element of sort of symbolism. They don't put the Queen just looking in the side and a load of people like eating a trifle or something. She's always bang in the middle of like a posed photo. That's the way it works. Now there are pictures of this little boy sitting there like that on a chair, and there's people on either side of him, like 3 people there, 3 people there. It does look like he's obviously important. But the point is, so he's got these pictures of this guy now. To prove that he's only got any link to this man is, there is no proof. And then he goes, they're all royal princesses. And you're like, okay, like, well, if they're all royal princesses, can you prove that each of those faces, put other pictures in, because this is a little book he was writing on behalf of this Francisco Manuel. He doesn't say, look, you've got these princesses, and here's the other pictures of them, and this is how so you could say, oh, that looks like I can see. And apparently all these royal princesses went on to be like queen, they got married to like the top royals in each country, like Sweden, Switzerland, whatever, and all around Europe. So they were like the top princesses, the ones who'd marry the sort of basically the kings or the next best thing in each of the countries. But he never bothers doing this, and then he starts banging on about royal marks, and if you say, look, where's the pictures of these princesses? He goes, fucking, what's the point? If they can't be bothered to do the research, what's the point? And it's like, look, people don't read a book to then go and start looking on the internet. They want at least like the first step to be done for them. He wasn't interested. He wasn't interested in doing that. Then he starts going on about these things called royal marks. Royal marks. Now, if you put royal marks into the internet, nothing comes up. And he's saying these are royal marks that royals understand, and that they mean that this person is the king, and they all reckon he's the king. Right now, this Francisco Manuel is an antiques dealer, yeah? And also apparently he's got a brother in Portuguese intelligence, and he lives in Portugal, and he lives in this place called the Citadella or something. I forget what it's called anyway. Looks quite a nice idyllic place he lives. But even though he wants Greg to kind of let his story out, because he reckons he's the true line to the throne of England, right? When Greg goes to stay with him, even though he's got quite a bit of land and stuff like that, he doesn't let Greg stay in his house. He makes him go and stay in a hotel at €40 a pop. And like, this hotel's not particularly good, and there's no real shops around there for food, you got nowhere to cook, so you have to go to restaurants every night. So basically, this guy, he wants to like claim the entire British Empire as his own, but he won't put Greg up in his house. But Greg, I don't know how, he's fucking gone mad, and he thinks that this guy is like, the bee's knees, and because he's being sucked in by it, he doesn't want to admit he's being fooled. So it's extremely funny, because Greg, I mean, he's extremely amusing. He's one of the most entertaining people you'll ever meet. There's no question of it. But the point is, he is a dickhead, right? And this guy has just played him like a complete fool, and it's so funny, right? And basically, so he's promoting this guy, and as a result, this guy, right, has sort of knighted him a while ago. He's knighted him, even though he's not been crowned a king. And Greg knows all about this stuff. He knows you're not the king unless you've been crowned, and you've got to be crowned at Westminster Abbey if you're an English king. He knows that there's always been disputes about each of the monarchs over the years, but you're not the king unless you've been crowned, have you? You can't just say, well, I am, so this. You've got to put a challenge in. Now, the funny thing about this is, that gets much more amusing is, then it changes, and he's actually got a YouTube video of him being crowned a prince and Lord Chancellor. Right, and this is where it gets even more funny. When he says, I am Lord Chancellor, it's like that guy Brian Gerrish who works for the UK column. He talks about UK rather than the UK. Right? If I was saying, I am the mayor, I don't go, I am mayor. It's wrong. That's not how you say it. So he goes, I am Lord Chancellor. And it's so funny because it doesn't grammatically make any sense. Now, so basically, he's been knighted a royal prince and Lord Chancellor, and he does no such thing. It's fucking hilarious, right? But the thing is, because he's so big-headed, and he sort of like goes around bullying anybody, he can, anyone who's not like extremely strong-willed, and even people who are, who just, they just think he's a dickhead and just ignore him. He's constantly bullying people, and this guy's sucked him in, and he's just made a complete arse of him. And then, so anyway, the thing is, so there's that one. So what I'm trying to say is, don't throw the baby out of the bathwater. Greg Hallett's come up with some very, very, very important things, but he gets very kind of, he acts funny around you if you don't believe something he says, or you want explanation, you can't explain it. Now, but this is the other completely stupid thing he comes out with, right? And I'll tell you why, because you've got to make your own mind up. He talks about this thing, and he never really explains when it's happened, but he gives you the impression that he's been given some special training at some stage in some kind of weird, like, high-tech intelligence stuff. And he basically claims that there was this guy, going back to the very interesting subject, the very legitimate subject of the reconstruction of the subconscious. He does say some very, very interesting things about this. Like, for instance, he said that he went to Hungary when he was younger, and he said that people were deconstructed. He said he didn't understand what it meant at the time, but that's what he realised later it was. He said the people would be walking around, and they'd just be in a kind of like weird state, and even though you couldn't understand language, you'd realise they weren't acting in their own interest. And he said it's because it was communism, they deconstructed them so they could be controlled easier. So they were basically, their subconscious wasn't acting in their own interest, it was acting for the purposes of the state's interest, not for their own interest. Now, I've talked to other people about Hungary since, and I've never been. Now, apparently Budapest is quite nice, but other people said that's really weird, because that's what we thought. We thought there was something strange. We weren't there. The people were sort of like all kind of like just not acting in their own interest. They all seemed to like have a really horrible, there's something, there was something weird about it, because it wasn't that much of a shithole, but the way the people behaved didn't seem quite right. There was something funny going on. So there's definitely something very legitimate there, and this is the problem, Greg, because you've got like the positive side, and you've got the negative side, which is very negative, but he's also got lots of very positive things, so very, very, useful contributory things that are very, you can't sell him short. But you see, the point is, he takes it a bit too far. So he says something completely legitimate, then he goes, what happened was, he's basically claimed that when the Berlin Wall came down, and this is where, he hasn't even thought this one through properly, he says that, he doesn't sort of say he did it to start off with, but he goes, nobody's ever explained how the gates opened and all the people went through. Now, obviously, it was all set up and it was a TV opportunity, so that's how it happened. But the point is, he's got a different story, which is obviously not true, I would suggest, very strongly. He says, what happened is, somebody body jumped, and this is some special thing that you can do. Apparently, if you get this special training, you can kind of jump into somebody's body and take over control of them. But he doesn't just leave it. I said, well, how does that happen? He goes, well, what happens is you get the terror fear, the terror fear. And you go, right, the terror fear, right, yeah, what's that? And he goes, what happens is, it's like in the SAS, they bring you down to this level where you're not scared of everything because you think you're going to die, and then you're in this very moldable state. Now, the SAS do this, and I've talked to people who've told me the exact same thing. But then he takes it one step further, because this has obviously happened to him, or he claims it has. He goes, you meet Anubis, Anubis, yeah, the terror fear kills some people, kills them, and basically you go down to the terror fear, you get the terror fear, and then you can body jump. It's like, okay, no you can't. Well, I don't think you can anyway. Let's just say you can. Let's just, for the sake of it, just say Greg can body jump. And I'd say, well, why don't you like go and body jump into that guy at the Indian takeaway, because you really want an Indian, don't you? And it costs too much because you haven't got much money, and you did promise me an Indian. And then I just give you an evil look. Not fucking don't go and body jump into, you can't be just taking these things lightly. But yeah, but you really do like picking yourself, so surely that's a good enough reason. Body jump into him and let you have like a year's worth of free curries. Anyway, just supposing he can do it, and this is where it goes wrong again. Is he says that he body jumped into the guard who was guarding the gate, and he said also the guard was a bit pissed because he was a Russian, he was drunk, and then somehow, and this is where, because you've got one story, but he wants to elaborate on the story, and this is where it gets silly. He goes, yeah, what we did, he's got basically this he's got this fixation that they have lots of female prostitute spies. Basically, they amused him with this prostitute spy. And it's like, well, hang on a minute, Greg. So, hang on a minute. So you've got this body jumping and you don't do it lightly. And, so basically you've body jumped into this guard and you've been keeping him busy because he's pissed. And also he's got this this prostitute's come in and sort of seduced him and distracted him or whatever. So did you body jump into him before he started to get shagging this prostitute, or did you jump into him afterwards? So who shagged this prostitute? Was it you or was it him? Do you see what I mean? It doesn't make any sense. So he makes two silly stories up, and you just think, what the fuck are you going on about? At least make a consistent silly story, but he can't do it. And you see, the thing is that sometimes he'll be talking to somebody in a bar and he'll say something completely sensible, but other times he'll say something completely stupid, and they'll just be like sitting there going, like, some of the hilarious things he comes out with, like, one of the best ones was, which literally I was laughing at so much, I couldn't actually I couldn't actually stay in the room. I had to run out of the room, and like I sort of almost was sick with laughing. He's got this fixation with anything sort of sexual deviant stuff, and he's got this idea that Helen Clark, who used to be the New Zealand Prime Minister, went to visit George Bush, and she was resisting going to the Iraq War. And he says what happened was George Bush sort of put him in Abraham Lincoln's cottage, which I'm told is in the grounds of the White House. And what he did is Helen Clark is apparently a lesbian. She had a lesbian girlfriend over with her. And then George Bush said, would you like a secretary? And she went, oh, secretary, oh, right, yeah. And he sent this CIA, what Greg calls a CIA pillow talker. And anyway, she went over there, and there was lots of fussing going on. And he keeps telling this story all the time, but she put poison on her hand. So now Helen Clark, Emily just pisses herself because she stuck this special stuff on her hand, and now she's got incontinence problems. And there was this new law that came in New Zealand where you weren't allowed to criticise politicians on a run-up to elections or just after elections, and they basically cornered off, if you took a year, the amount of times you wouldn't be allowed to have protests, because they were saying it's unfairly affects these prospects of these, like disproportionately affects the prospects of these New Zealand politicians' chances of getting in. And it was nobody in the country accepted it, and they all went out protesting as soon as they weren't allowed to. And Greg says he went out with a placard that said Helen Clark wears incontinence nappies. You just think it's just so funny. But when he's telling this story about fusting, he was telling this story about fusting in front of these people at this kind of, this like little meeting where he did a talk. And he told them he was going to go and talk about Hitler was a British agent. These people were very interested. They all went along to see it, and he starts going about fusting, and they're like, what's he saying? And then they realise what he's saying, and they get really angry because they go, you've got no evidence for this. And he's just going, yeah, there's loads of evidence. What evidence? Yeah, don't worry, I'll get onto it. And he doesn't get onto it. But the whole point is, what I'm trying to say is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater with Greg Hallett. Like, he is a dickhead, but he's very, very amusing. He's not all bad, but he is a dickhead. Make no mistake about it. But he's so incredibly amusing. But then that doesn't mean that some of the things he says aren't actually correct. And with the things that have been going on in England recently, I think it's very clear that lots of the things that he said were completely dead on the mark, and you've got to give him a lot of credit for coming out with that, because it hasn't done him any favours. But and again, if you ever get a chance to meet him, he is extremely amusing. So I don't know, take from that what you want. I'll be interested to know what you think. If you ever meet him, let me know if he's got any new stupid things he's coming out with, or if he's got some insightful, useful thing, because he does come out with some very insightful, useful thing. He spends his whole time researching. Anyway, thanks a lot. Hope you're doing all right, Greg. Bye now.